All right. Well, I think that works for sure. I know we'll just wait a little bit for LinkedIn and YouTube to catch on because they take, technology takes a little time.
Yeah, they lag a little bit.
They
Yeah.
do, they definitely do. But I know we have a lot of people who are interested in, finding out how is this gonna happen and what we're talking about today, getting excited from Thanksgiving in the
Yeah.
US. Yeah. You have big
Well,
plans for Thanksgiving.
that's going to be the theme I have. So
Oh yeah, for sure.
even throw a little history in there
Yes, you
about
need to help me with that history though, because not that good with that history.
we have a pretty diverse attendee list here, right? So,
Mm,
um, I've as the one of the few Americans maybe participating. I don't know. I'll make sure that we explain what this all this is
yes,
all about. So, yeah.
definitely. Definitely. So I know we're live on LinkedIn, we're live on YouTube.
Okay.
Everybody's just coming in slowly, but we're getting in there. So we're gonna,
Oh,
you know, get ourselves started off with this one because I know like
okay.
it's very interesting for me hearing the history from your side and from your point of view, especially when we combine lubrication involved in it. Like, why not? Right? Because I think we've done so much evolution over the past 100 years or more that I hope that we're not doing the same things that we did back in 1600s today. We better not be doing that. We should have evolved by now. We
And
definitely should
maybe
have
we'll
evolved.
embarrass some folks today.
Maybe not. Let's try not to.
Yeah.
But we'll see how, because I know things have changed so much, but still some things remain the same, unfortunately. So I know that's what we're going to address today in our session. And I know we have like Linda Perry joining in on LinkedIn.
Good.
Um, we had Ivan Paradata, joining in on YouTube. I know Ray Daly, happy Thanksgiving to you. Um, he made a comment to recommend this session that we're having today.
Great.
So very excited, Ray's a great guy. So, very excited that he was excited about it as well.
Yeah, I think I saw something where he just celebrated 40 years in the
Yes.
industry, right?
Well
So
done, Ray. Well done. It's more
maybe
years
he
than
was
I have in
maybe
life,
he was
but
one of he was one of the lubrication pilgrims, maybe all the way back then.
maybe
Maybe.
some history and some ancestry involved there. But definitely, because I know we have some people joining in here on LinkedIn and we have them joining in on YouTube as well. So I think we could probably get started because before people get hungry, it's Thanksgiving and all that.
That's right.
But we'll like very interested to hear what you're going to be talking about today, Rich. So I'll pass it
Yeah.
to you.
Okay, thank you. So yes, it is. This is like in the U.S. People are like trying to get out of work early right now,
Yeah.
and they're
Hmm.
starting their vacation for our Thanksgiving, which happens on this Thursday in November every year. And again, like we said when we started this off, not everybody understands it, has heard of it, knows
Hmm.
what it's all about. So we're going to tie Thanksgiving, the holiday, into lubrication, and we're going to answer this question: are you a lubrication pilgrim? Now what does that mean? Well, the pilgrims are really at the center of this celebration, so we'll call this a lubrication Thanksgiving. And very close to where I'm broadcasting from right now in York, Pennsylvania, is this marker for the first national Thanksgiving.
Oh.
So back in 1777, just when the country had just started, was only less than a year old, or maybe just over a year old. They held the first national Thanksgiving. The Congress, our lawmaking body, was in York at that time, running away from the British, hiding, ducking, and all that. And but they said, let's have the first one day of public Thanksgiving
Okay.
for the new country, and so that's so where I'm speaking from today is the birthplace of the first national Thanksgiving, and it's also the birthplace of the grease thief, which we will
Yes.
bring up in this discussion here. But we're going to answer this question: are we greasing like a pilgrim, right? And what should we be thankful for that we don't have to lubricate like they did in the 1600s? So I kind of looked back and thought, what was the state of machinery and everything else at that time? And of course, there are folks that have looked back, into many thousands of years BC to find lubricants being used in the time of the pharaohs and in Syria and places like this. So we know lubricants have been used throughout time. But if we think about this time of the Pilgrims, when they first landed here in the United States in 1620, at that time, the Industrial Revolution was really getting started, and it was really limited at that point to England. So there wasn't a lot of machinery to lubricate, and therefore the lubrication technology was quite poor. But what did they do? Well, the Pilgrims were in a part of the U.S. called New England, which would be states like Massachusetts and Connecticut. So they did hunt for whales at that time, and whale oil was used for
I've heard
lamps.
about that.
Yeah. And in some cases, the whale oil or the blubber, as it were, could be a kind of grease, let's say, for an axle or something like that. The other half of Thanksgiving, because this is really a bringing together of two cultures, there was a treaty between the English that were coming in as pilgrims and the Native Americans, and the Native Americans shared many things with the pilgrims at that time. The Native Americans used native animals, and they're very well known for being very efficient in using all the parts and not letting anything go to waste. So that would include the fats, right, on these animals. And so, and I still hunt today in the U.S. and I see the same thing. I can see that when we're looking at that animal, there's all these resources there. So they use that. So they probably harvested whales. They were using parts of the animals that were being harvested. And let's say greasing like a pilgrim probably meant any grease is better than no grease. They just had to use what they had available, right? So whether it was from the whale or a deer or a turkey or whatever it was, they were using some grease. They had no synthetic greases anywhere in sight. So is that much different than what we're doing? So there may be some people tuning in, and maybe they have the idea that any grease is better than no grease, or they've never even considered a synthetic grease. They just use what's commonly available. And maybe they're not much better than a pilgrim. So, we're going to talk about that a little bit, because we're talking about, 400 years later now, technology has really changed. And if we are not taking advantage of that technology as it has evolved, and there's been huge innovation over the last 20, 25 years in the areas of lubricants and greases. There's been all sorts of formulation differences and so forth. And if we're not looking at that, if we say, hey, that's the way they've always greased it, or the guy that was here before me, that's what he told me I should do, without any questioning attitude, then we be maybe no better than the pilgrims.
Correct.
So here are the technologies that the pilgrims didn't have. They didn't have advanced grease technologies. They didn't have synthetic thickeners. They just used blubber, right? Or in some cases, maybe they even got clever and thickened it up with some materials, but it wasn't the high quality synthetic options that we have today. The oils were natural. Now we have the option of synthetic base oils that can make a big difference. And we have all these modern additives. It's an area of constant innovation. Couple examples that I just threw out here, like a lithium complex grease. You could almost make that if you were a pilgrim. You would take an animal fat, and then you would combine it with a caustic material like lye, and get a soap out of that. That's how they made soaps at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And that soap put into the oil could create a thickener. So it's something that they could, kind of a technology that they could develop at that time. But I'm just guessing that everything was pretty simple and they just used what was around
Very.
them, right? We know they didn't use polyurea greases because they
Definitely not.
did not understand polymer chemistry. But when we find that these options are there, we can see not only just, and this is where like people say, well, is that oil synthetic or is it mineral based?
Oh, yeah.
And we talk about the oil itself, and that's a pretty straightforward evaluation. When someone asks, are we using a synthetic grease?
Right.
There's two parts to that. They could be
Yeah.
using a basic non-synthetic thickener, or they could be using a synthetic thickener like a polymer.
Right.
And then from the base oil perspective, they could be using a mineral oil or a synthetic base oil. So you could have a synthetic thickener used with a mineral base oil. And some of the, for instance, some of the electric motor greases, that's what they are. Polyurea thickened mineral oil. What would happen if we would take that mineral oil and substitute for it a more advanced, longer living, better oxidation resistance synthetic oil in that grease? So we get a different kind of grease that would have longer life and better performance. So if we don't dig into this, and here we get a sense of all the options. It's no longer just a whale and a deer, right?
Yeah.
All these different materials we have access to. We've evolved so much in this time that we've come out. And like I said, even the last couple of decades, there's been huge innovations. But sometimes we just get stuck in a rut. We say, well, that's what we've been using all this time. There are differences with different lubricants. And if we don't evaluate what those options are, we may not be able to take advantage of some of these things. So we don't want to be a lubrication pilgrim and just shrug our shoulders and say, that's
Whatever
all we
works.
have, that's been, right? We want to go further. So here is a graph that I like to share with people that really kind of busts open this whole idea. Like someone says, how often should I re-lubricate?
Yeah.
The answer that they get is often, well, there's a chart and there's a table and there's calculators you can use, and you can go to a bearing website, or you can go to our friend Mike Johnson at Amory. He's creating these calculators that you can use.
Yes.
But they're all based off of the lowest common denominator of grease.
Yeah.
They're basing it off of a non-synthetic solution. And so when you look at this table, which is very interesting, and it comes from some German studies that were done, it's really a function of the temperature, okay? A function of the temperature that it experiences, as well as the speeds involved, right? So you've got different speeds here represented. You've got different products, the curves for different products here, and you've got this variation in temperature. And let's just say we pick kind of an easy application first at 50 degrees Celsius. So we down on the x-axis there, we look at 50 degrees. When we come up and we cross this line with lithium stearate and mineral oil. Now, lithium stearate, that's a simple soap and a mineral oil. So this is kind of your basic grease, which would be that lowest common denominator I'm talking about.
Yes.
You'll notice that grease is only going to last maybe about 2,000 hours of operation before it's going to oxidize, right? So is that how often we should change out the grease? Well, it is if we're using that type of grease. But if at the same operating temperature, we would switch to, now there's a polyurea with a mineral oil base, look at that. We're up in the tens of thousands of hours of life.
Yeah.
And if we take it even further and we change not only the thickener, but the base oil to a synthetic, now we're into the hundreds of thousands of hours. And so this idea that certain greases will last much longer than others is brought into play when we have sealed bearings, right?
Yep.
You can't seal a bearing up with grease that only lasts a few hundred or a few thousand hours because we've made a very short life bearing in the process, right? The end of life of the bearing becomes the end of life of the grease.
Yep.
But we can think about this too, that in higher temperature environments, the life of the grease drops off quite dramatically, whether it's a basic mineral type oil, plain soap thickener, whether it's a synthetic. And when you get to very high temperatures, you can see that most of these greases drop off to a very low period of life, and we have to get up into this fourth graph here, which is the PTFE
Yeah.
thickened fluoro ethers. And these are the reason we don't see people using them is because they're very expensive.
Yeah.
And well, how can I justify that? I can buy grease at, let's say, $10 a tube, or I can
Mhm.
spend $200 a tube.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't think about how it's going to be used and how it's going to perform differently, you'd be foolish to pay 20
Mhm.
times what you have to, unless you understand that it's not just
Why?
about the cost of the grease, it's or the price of the grease, it's about the cost of owning that asset.
Mhm.
And if we extend out that life, I mean, if you go to say 100 degrees Celsius, um, maybe a better figure to use would be 150 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
50 degrees Celsius, you should come up and you hit that first line, and you're in 30 hours. So it's going to burn right through that lithium
Yeah.
mineral oil. If you then switch to the polyurea thickened, now you're getting a few hundred hours, but that's not a
Mhm.
lot. That's a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And if you go to the full synthetic polyurea thickened synthetic thickener and the ester synthetic base oil, now you're up over into a couple of thousands, but it's still
Right.
not extremely long. But if you go to this perfluoroether, now you're
Mhm.
into the tens of thousands of hours. So I think often people don't even realize
Yeah.
all the advancements that have been made in the types of greases, the types of thickeners, and how that may impact how long these things really last. And I think that's a very important reason to
It
consider a
is.
graph like this.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people don't know that the graph exists, or they've heard about it, but they've never seen it in their life. So bringing this up and allowing them to just know that there are differences, ask your suppliers as well.
Mhm.
There are differences, so understand why you want to choose a particular type of grease. So thank
Yeah.
you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, and sometimes, we've got an operating environment where people can easily access the
Yeah.
machine. There might be other issues other than the temperature and the
Hmm.
speed that are breaking down the grease. There might be contamination issues, so we
Definitely.
want to purge the grease out. So there are times when it doesn't make sense because we'll never be able
Right.
to take advantage of this greater capacity and greater life. But if
Yeah.
we never even consider it, we may have a situation like I did a study for the Electric Power Research Institute
Hmm.
to look at different greasing methodologies. Their concern was it's very difficult for us to take people while the plant is up and running and go in and lubricate the machines. So is there
Right.
any technology where we could extend that out to the 2-year interval? And so we did find that we had a polyurea synthetic based oil which
Right.
was hitting the 2-year period in a simulated bearing, and now they could get away and they can eliminate those at power replenishments and just do it when they actually have the maintenance window
Yeah.
to do it, which is much lower cost. So the grease itself would be much more expensive, but the
Yeah.
real cost in that environment is trying to do that when you're trying to make power. And so there
Hmm.
are
That's
there are
expensive.
examples. Yeah, it is, and there are examples where we can really save the cost of asset ownership by choosing the right
Hmm.
grease, or even a higher performing grease in that case. So,
Definitely.
so now that we've introduced this, we have to take that hard look
Oh
at
yeah.
ourselves. Are we taking advantage, or are we greasing like a pilgrim? Right?
Hmm.
Just taking what's around us and just throwing that in there. So if we don't want to grease like a pilgrim, we have to break out and use what we have and make our purchases of grease for
Yeah.
value. Okay. Synthetic and advanced thickeners, greater shear resistance, longer
Yep.
life. Synthetic base oils can have greater heat resistance, and therefore they will also have longer life. There might be additives and they might cost a little bit more in a
Yep.
certain package, but if they are specific to the application and they enhance the grease performance, not only might the grease last longer, but the machine might last longer.
It would.
So the way we break out of greasing like a pilgrim is considering higher cost greases to reduce
Hmm.
consumption, therefore deliver lower cost of asset ownership.
Yeah, and your asset ownership is very important because sometimes we forget about that. And when we start thinking about, and I know we all have issues with, the budgets, and they're telling us, reduce the budget, we can't spend as much. But when you look at your total cost of your assets, then you're actually spending a lot more on your asset if you don't use the right greases. So
Right.
something
It's
to very much consider.
Yeah, it's the argument of pay a little bit more to save a lot
Hmm.
more,
Yeah,
right? And
definitely.
and 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 sometimes it takes someone, number one, understanding this, and this is why we put this in the training classes, right? We want
Hmm.
the people that come out, and I know you just had a posting with a whole series of training
Oh
classes
boy.
you're promoting and so forth. But that's why we do this, because
Yeah.
if the folks that are working with the assets, if they realize this,
Yeah.
if they realize those opportunities are there, then they can be that voice.
Yes.
They can say, I don't want to grease like a pilgrim. I want to
No.
move on. I want to take advantage of the modern things that are
Hmm.
here and lower that cost of
Yeah.
ownership. Yeah. Well, another thing that leaves us greasing like a pilgrim is
Oh yeah.
monitoring. Are we because the pilgrims, they didn't have it. They didn't have
No.
technology to monitor the greasing amounts. They just made that stuff and put it all
Yeah.
in and slapped it all in there. They had no way of knowing that there was a problem, that the grease was
Right.
no longer being effective. And when they were able to detect it, it was because it was a squeaky wheel, right?
Yeah.
And you get the squeaky wheel gets the grease. But at that point,
Always.
it's too late. You're already doing
Yeah.
damage, right? We need to be proactive. And I'm
Hmm.
sure the pilgrims felt that more grease is the better. If you don't have any feedback,
Yeah.
just keep slapping it on there till you see it running out, and then you're good and greased, right? So even though it's 2024, do you think there's some asset owners out there that are greasing like a pilgrim?
Yes, I think so. I can say that without hesitation, and that sounds terrible because it's 400 years later and we're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
definitely, like every time you go into some of these plants, they wait until they have an issue, or they're like, yeah, something doesn't sound right. I'm gonna add some grease. And I know Alan Reinstra of SDT, he tells us all the time, ultrasound helps to know how much grease to put in
What
when
it,
we're
what it,
doing those things.
Absolutely. What a great lead in to the next,
Oh yes.
to the next slide where, so let's say, what are our tools to monitoring lubrication
Hmm.
effectiveness? It actually is with the tools like Alan Reenstra has with
Hmm.
SDT,
Yep.
with UE systems and some of the
Right.
other folks that are out there, because what we're doing in that case is we're listening
Yep.
uh, to something that we can't normally hear, right?
Yeah.
And that's what Alan says, hear more, right? Hear
Yes,
more
he
than you can.
does. He does.
Unfortunately, we didn't have any headsets in the Pilgrim times. They didn't have any tools to listen in. It had to progress so that it was in a worse condition, and the squeaky wheel then got the grease. But we have tools now, right? As
Yes.
when the friction in the bearing increases, okay, then we need to add more lubrication, and that's true whether it's something where
Mm.
okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. Whether we have the individual that's going around with the grease gun and we give them the
Hmm.
tools and a set of headphones like this, and they
Yeah.
know when to start, when to stop. Or now we have a number of companies have these real time sensors,
Yes.
right? Where they're hooked right up, not like this shows, you can't put it on the outright, put it on the housing, and then you're listening, or it's listening, right?
Hmm.
And then it's going to pump grease automatically when those ultrasound levels come up and bring them back down again. So I think that's really fascinating to have a
Very
tool
cool.
like that in some critical applications. But it is an obvious and maybe the first and most important way to monitor that lubrication effectiveness, the quantity that we're adding, and so forth. It's
Yes,
using that
definitely.
ultrasound. Yeah. What else is
Definitely.
there? There's also
Grease
uh,
analysis.
grease analysis, right? So I've got a few slides here. We've got, and some of the folks who have joined us in the past have
Hmm.
seen these before. And these are all tools that the Pilgrims didn't have,
No,
because
they did not.
I know we invented them over the last 15 to 10, 20 years. We invented them. So the poor Pilgrims didn't have the GreaseThief.
Too
Sorry to
bad.
Yeah, it's a shame. Some of these look like they could be a turkey baster, right? They could have
They
used
do. They honestly do.
pretty, pretty close. I think down in the middle on the bottom there looks like a couple turkey
Uh-huh.
basters in there. But no, this is all about sampling grease. And the key here is matching up the sampling tools
Hmm.
to the application, to the machine. And we've got all sorts of complex grease lubricated machines, and whether they're have pillow block bearings, support
Right.
bearings, hanger bearings, electric motors, where we're trying to get in there and protect them, whether it's a gearbox situation, robots, wind turbines, or even those small openings where
Yeah.
we need a
Very
special
tiny.
tool to get in. And that's where we've talked before about the pickpocket, right?
Yes.
The pickpocket that goes into a very small diameter opening, allows us to transfer this, where you can see here, this small piece at the end is taking that 1 gram sample and putting that
Mm-hmm.
into a vial. And then that sample there can be transferred into the GreaseThief that we've talked about.
Yep.
So there's options at all levels. It's like, it doesn't really matter how simple or how complex
Mm-hmm.
your machine is or the sampling challenge is. There's a solution for that, and that's what we try to match up. It's certainly something that the Pilgrims did not
Do
have a
not,
that.
yeah, they
No,
did not dream about that yet.
no. And the next step, which kind of goes along with this whole
Right.
idea that we introduced with ultrasound, is using the information to
Mm-hmm.
optimize what we're doing, right? And you and
Yeah.
I participated a few weeks
Yes.
ago. We talked about the mini lab, and I'm getting really excited about the mini lab now because we're
Yeah.
really advancing this. And I'm talking to some folks out there. I was able to talk to some folks at a conference the other day where
Nice.
they have numerous maintenance centers for their
Mm-hmm.
assets, and the person there is actually trying to make a visual call on the grease, like how's
Wow.
the grease look to you? Does it look bad? Does it look
Yeah.
good? And they're making significant cost decisions based off of, I guess it's okay. When we
Mm.
see that, it's like which is probably what the Pilgrims had to do, right?
Yeah.
There was,
Mm-hmm.
if we had a Pilgrim that was replacing your was it your sewing loom or something like
Yeah.
that? I'm trying to think of what tools they had at that
Mm.
point. But that person had to just eyeball it up and say it's
Yeah.
this or it's
Mm.
that. And fortunately, unlike the Pilgrims, we have these fantastic tools that have come along, and we can do that. Now, at this screenshot from when we talked about the mini lab, you can
Mm-hmm.
see that. Well, I don't remember. Did the Pilgrims have iPhones? Is that?
I don't think they did.
I don't
Maybe
think
not.
they did. They were probably stuck with flip phones, right?
I
Yeah.
don't know if they had flips or they
They
just
didn't
had
even
a
have
cup.
that. Well, we know we didn't have. They didn't have these
Yeah.
smartphones, right? And so the smartphone that I'm showing there is, has the comparison. Oops,
Mm-hmm.
has the comparison of the color
The
of the
two
grease
pieces.
on the
Yeah.
left, and
Yeah.
then the color of the sample that was taken, and you can actually measure that quantitatively.
Yeah.
So now you don't have to ask someone to interpret through their eyesight if they think the grease is any good.
Right.
And you and I have talked about how
Oh, yes.
vision is not reliable. Human vision is not reliable
No,
for that, right? Because the particles that are of concern are how big?
they're tiny. We can't see them with our visual. We can't see them with our naked eyes.
No, no. And so it's really setting someone up for failure.
Yeah.
If you insist, you just need to look at this grease and decide if it's a problem or not, because they
Mm-hmm.
can't see that. They can't see
Yeah.
that.
And
So
then we interpret color differently.
we do,
We do.
different people. It has to do with available lighting. Some
Mm-hmm.
people have different vision
Right.
acuities. There's even folks who are colorblind out there and
Yes.
may or may not know that limitation.
Yeah.
So turn it over to a machine. Turn it over to a machine that is going to do it the same every time. It's going to give us a numerical value, and with that numerical value, we can make the right decision. Either there is
Definitely.
no damage here, the grease looks fine, let it go, or we found an issue. Let's
Mm-hmm.
take it further. Let's identify it. Maybe let's send it to a laboratory,
Yes.
dig deeper, and tell us exactly what's going on. So, again, another tool that the Pilgrims didn't have, and
No.
we have. But is everyone taking advantage of it, or are we continuing to grease like a pilgrim? If,
Mm-hmm.
if we don't want to grease like a pilgrim, we got to break out and use what we have. We have ultrasound. And even though that's really taken off in the last 5 years or so, that
Yeah.
more and more people are getting aware of it and doing it, there's still plenty that don't do it. They don't
Yes.
have it. They don't have the tools. So if we have lubrication professionals, we can either give them a hat with a belt buckle on it like this, or we can give them the right tool,
The
the right
right tools.
technology to get it done,
Yeah.
right? So, and if we have critical bearings, we can be
Mm-hmm.
considering the continuous ultrasound monitoring,
Right.
like we talked about, where you put that
Mm-hmm.
sensor right on that housing.
Yep.
It delivers the grease when you're not even there.
Mm-hmm.
You might be at home enjoying a turkey dinner for Thanksgiving, and a system like this is there delivering the grease to your machine at the exact moment it needs it.
Making
Because
sure you don't have to leave that turkey dinner.
that's right. Because whether it's in the United States or Thanksgiving, Canadians Thanksgiving I think is earlier than
I
ours.
think it was, yeah, I think it's gone already. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was
Yeah.
weeks ago. But
Yeah.
whether it's Thanksgiving or whatever celebration any of us in any part of the world celebrate, often our machines don't take a holiday,
They
right?
do not.
So they're out there running, and boy, if we had some critical stuff and we use that continuous ultrasound and grease delivery system, we could sit at home and not worry about it, and it's
Yep.
all being taken care of. Of course, in addition to ultrasound, we talked about grease sampling,
Mm-hmm.
the GreaseThief sampling kits to monitor the assets, and then the analysis with all the guidance that's there
Right.
with the standards and so forth. But I want to introduce a new term here today, which is GLOW, which is
Oh,
grease lubrication optimization.
and you
GLOW.
heard it here first.
That's right. Because I don't think it's front of mind for people. I think it's,
Mm-hmm.
in many cases, grease is just thought of, you just pump it in when you hear something squeaking, right? Or it's a
Yep.
reaction, or, oh, that calendar task comes up and I have to pump it till it
Mm-hmm.
goes out somewhere. And, it's not good for the machine.
Yeah.
It's not good for available resources of labor that you have. It's
Mm-hmm.
not good for the environment in terms of digging up petroleum that we don't have to dig up
Yeah.
because we're using too much grease. So GLOW, grease lubrication optimization, says let's minimize that usage. Let's
Yep.
let's let's minimize the ecological impact that greases have on the environment. And what hits everybody, dollars in our pocket,
Yeah.
right? Cost of asset ownership. And all of those can be improved through that GLOW approach, the grease lubrication
Mm-hmm.
optimization. And my greatest example of that is back to the Chinook helicopters, right? We've
Oh,
talked
yes,
that before, how
definitely.
we have an ongoing savings of $100 million
Mm-hmm.
every year for that fleet of 1,400 helicopters.
All
So
right.
if that's what we have there, what else do we have? What else
Yeah.
is untapped? So don't be like a pilgrim. Let's use these tools. Let's use the analysis and sampling and ultrasound, which together I think make
Mm-hmm.
this GLOW approach, the grease lubrication
Very, very much. Yeah. I think using one technology only is really behaving like a pilgrim because they didn't have many technologies.
That's
But
right.
if we have so many different technologies, using them together kind of helps us to get a better idea of what's going on because they all measure different things. And the only way for us to really understand is to glow up and, get
Yeah,
that get that glow going.
that's
I'm
right. Get that
gonna
GLOW
use
going. Yeah,
that.
and sometimes it's just like, look, let's just start with one tool.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but it's one tool, and it may be
Hmm.
easiest to implement. Putting a grease or a ultrasound detector in the hands
Yeah.
of your folks who are doing the greasing. That might be the first step, or the first step
Right.
may be, I have no idea if the greasing I'm doing is effective,
Right.
if it's done often enough or amounts enough, or if I'm doing it too much. And so spot checking with grease sampling can
Yeah.
help answer those questions on, and we could do it maybe on one machine that's representative of a lot of other machines, see
Hmm.
where we stand, see what the status is, and then we know what to attack. But
Yeah.
like you say, glow up,
Glow up.
adapt the technologies, and glow up, and don't be a pilgrim.
Don't be a pilgrim.
So yeah, so the grease thief is here to help, and I think it's time for us to show Thanksgiving for these
Hmm.
amazing and modern tools that
Yes.
we have, that we're not stuck. If we choose
Hmm.
to embrace it, we're not stuck like the pilgrims.
Yeah.
We have all this technology we can use, and we certainly are a people of technology adoption, right? It's
Hmm.
like the smartphone in a few years is now in hands all around the world, to some incredible penetration into populations and countries
Hmm.
all over the world. So it's not about technology adoption. It's not that
Yeah.
our, whether you say it's our generation or this time in our people, that we're not shying away from it. It's just, have we used and leveraged what's there for grease lubricated machinery
Hmm.
effectively or not? And so hopefully Sonia, what we're doing together here
Yes.
every month, delivering a message like this, is making an impact because, I truly believe that it's a tricky thing where
Yes.
historically the money was not allocated for this. If you go and say, okay, it's time for me to do grease analysis
Yeah.
or grease sampling, there's not grease analysis money in the budget.
Yeah.
There might not even be ultrasound money in the budget. So the case
Definitely.
needs to be made. The individuals who are responsible for the asset performance need to make that case. They need to say, this is why we're doing it. This is what we're doing. This is what we're going to save. And I think that's why we decided to help originally the folks in the Middle East with this,
Yeah.
say, let's help them make that case to the decision
Mm-hmm.
makers in their companies and industries in their part of the world. And we've now taken this beyond that. But hopefully there was some nuggets in here today. When I said we might embarrass some people, I think the embarrassment is, well, I guess I am a
Yeah.
lubrication pilgrim.
Mm-hmm. Don't be a pilgrim.
Don't be a pro.
Don't.
Now you know how to get out of that and
Mm-hmm.
to move forward with the technology and really better protect and help your important grease lubricated assets.
Yeah, and I know shout out to Hamza who joined us. I saw him drop a note on LinkedIn, on YouTube, sorry, and Linda Perry as well. She dropped another comment, always innovation at its best because that's how we need to evolve. That's how we're gonna get out of the pilgrim mode and get into the 400 years later modern technology world because we need to be able to monitor our assets and to do it properly so that we save the assets. Because the assets, when you look at the cost of the asset versus the cost of your grease or the cost of implementing a particular technology, it's very easy to justify, you know, bringing in that new technology or bringing in different things to help you to protect that asset. Because at the end of the day, if the asset goes down, your entire plant could go down. And then you can have people, if we're talking about the power plants like we spoke about earlier, hospitals, these very, very critical facilities that can't function without these things. So we want to make sure that they can function and that they are not going down. So it's very critical to monitor your assets, especially where grease is involved, because I think sometimes grease grease gets a bad name in that people don't understand it as much, and they are like, okay, well, we can't change anything here. Let's just use whatever we find available, and that's pilgrim thinking, as we
Yeah.
found out today. Total pilgrim thinking. But we need to assess the criticality of our assets, what we're using them for. And like, I love the graph that you shared earlier in terms of the lifespan of the greases and how do we adjust, because a lot of times people just take the first grease that they can, usually a lithium based, and they're like, this is gonna work. And then they have their bearings fail 30 hours later and they don't understand why they fail.
Right.
So just being able to know that there are tools available to help you to understand. And I think that's really what this entire thing is about, bringing the tools to people, helping them to know that there are things that they can do and things that we can try to save our assets because we want to save them. We don't want them to die.
Glow up, right?
Glow up. That's our message for today, is to glow up.
Yeah. And I'm sure that most Americans anyway relate to the story of the
Yeah.
Pilgrims. But
Yeah.
it's really just being used as an example in time, right? There's a
Mm-hmm.
there's a the period in time that goes back, we're talking 400 years now. So maybe different
Yeah.
countries and different cultures will have something analogous for that, where you
Mm-hmm.
where you say, instead of don't be a pilgrim, well, don't be someone
Yeah.
who's stuck in the past. And I don't know what all
Mm-hmm.
those things are, but maybe the people listening today can draw those parallels. And if you're not taking advantage of these tools, you're really not much better than someone that lived hundreds of
Existed
years ago.
400 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's really the takeaway. And we I think we're going to stay on this message of Glow Up, because Glow Up has incredible cost
It
savings
does.
potential for all sorts of industries. And I sometimes I look at, and you probably do this too. You go into some sort of manufacturing environment,
Oh yeah.
see all these things, and you're like, my goodness, how are they making money, right? And part of it is, well, you may be in an industry where they've got some specialty and it's not really competitive, but
Mm-hmm.
more and more people are adopting this. And
Yep.
if a certain company says, I'm fine being a Pilgrim, I'm fine doing what was always done the same way, and not
Mm-hmm.
innovating and not finding the new tools and not putting them into practice, they will get left behind.
They
They'll
will.
they'll be sitting on the shore with their wooden boat, the big rock, and scrounging in the
Oh
woods
my
for whatever
gosh.
meal,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So this is our Thanksgiving. This is the start of a pretty significant and long holiday for most
Yes.
Americans. It's probably the number one holiday for family getting together, especially as we
Yes.
get to go to different areas and get spread out. And that means this afternoon the traffic is going to be terrible.
Oh boy.
just about anywhere in the U.S. And so we won't go long today. We'll let people go
Yes.
and let them maybe get a jump on
Head
things.
starts. Head
But
starts on traffic.
but I want to wish you and your family,
Yes.
Sonia, a wonderful week ahead as
Thank
we
you so
here in the
much.
U.S. celebrate Thanksgiving, and I'm looking forward to doing that with my family as well.
Yes. And the girls one day. So happy Thanksgiving to you, Rich. Happy
Yep.
Thanksgiving to everybody else who is celebrating today. And if you're celebrating anything else this weekend, have a good weekend. We're glad that you took some time to join us. I would say this morning on our side, but I know it's different times and different areas. So thank you for taking the time to join us. And for those of you all who missed it, check out the recording. I know we had, I'm just going to shout out a few people that we had. Rohit had joined us. I know it's very early for him in the morning on his side. Mohammed had joined us as well. Tanraj from Singapore, of course, Linda. So, thank you all so much for taking the time to just join us today and to be with us on just before the holiday. So, wishing you all a great holiday and do not grease like a pilgrim. It's time to glow up. That's our
Time to
message for
glow
today.
up. Happy
Glow up.
Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. Bye.
All right, bye now.